Hello, my name is John Dillon, and we're here to talk about Apex programming. Today's topic is going to be Apex logging. Let's take a look. So if you've followed this channel, you may have seen some of this code before. This is something we did in one of our trigger episodes. This is a trigger on an opportunity when something is happening in the account. Based on the account, we make some decisions down here. But the thing that we're going to look at today is this line right here, which we kind of glossed over. We've used lots of debugs in the past, just assuming that you knew what they are. So here we're going to just dig a little deeper into what's actually going on with the debugging system in Apex. In other programming environments, you often have an integrated debugger to help you troubleshoot problems in your code and with your logic. With Salesforce and with Apex, we do not have that. At least not for a reasonable price. Usually what we're going to be doing is relying on the debug system, the logging system for doing our debugging. So we've got this line here, system.debug, and again, this was from a previous episode on triggers, where we were simply dumping out some information on the account. So let's take a little deeper dive into what's going on here, and as we often do, we will start with the documentation. The debug method lives on the system class, which is in the system namespace. So here's the documentation for system class. There are lots of methods available to us off this class, but the only two we're concerned with today are debug and debug with a log level. So the debug method, we simply pass in a message. Usually this is a string, but as we can see from the signature, any kind of object can be passed in. And if it's not a string, like it says right here, the system will call string value of. So no matter what we pass in, whether it's an exception, an opportunity, or a class that we've made up by ourselves, it's going to be string value of is what's going to get called. So it does get converted to a string at the end of the day. The similar method, debug with a log level, is the exact same thing. We pass in a message that's either a string or gets converted to a string. But we actually get the opportunity to set the logging level. We will look at the logging level enum to see what's available to us there. And if this doesn't make sense, it will in a minute once we show the example. An enum is something that has various values that it can be, but not arbitrary. So in this case, the enums for logging level are none, error, warning, info, all the way down to finest, as you can see here. For me, I'm typically going to use error, warning, and debug. These other ones are here. If your logging needs are a little more fine-grained and you need lots of levels, they're here for you. But in my experience, 3 is plenty. So how do we implement this in code? So we've already seen an example, but let's just, let's change this. So here we have our debug message, and this is happening on an opportunity trigger. So for us to actually get this code to execute, what we could do is take any opportunity, make a minor change, and save it. So from our opportunities list, we can pick any one of these. This one. So what we could do is simply edit the description. And when we save it, we can see a log shows up here in our logs window on Developer Console. So if we open up the log and we filter on debug statements, we can see our log message. But what more could we do with this? So let's take a look at the second version of the debug, where we can actually add a logging level enum. So here we can add whether it's a debug statement, error, info, warning, other things here that I'm not going to worry about. And we separate it by a comma. Let's do several different types of message. And again, if we change the description, it'll hit the trigger. And we can One of the nice things about looking at our logs in the dev console is we can see if we read it or not. We can see we read this first one that came through, the second one is unread. So if you've got a lot of logs to go through, that's a convenient feature. So if we filter on debug, we can see we got all four: the error message, the warning message, the info, and the debug. So what's the purpose of having those levels? If you've got lots of debug statements within your code, you might have some that are triggered, to really handle errors, some for warnings and some for simply troubleshooting a current issue. If your logs are, here we only have 4, but I've seen cases where you might have 100 or more, and it might be a little hard to read. So sometimes you want to filter out based on the level. And we accomplish that using the log levels feature here. I'm not going to go into all the different things we can do in here. We can do class and trigger level debugging, and we'll get into users in just a minute. But here what we're going to do is just change the level action. And we can see we're tracing various aspects of the system. We can do separate tracings for validations and workflows. Today we're simply looking at the Apex code, and we're debugging at the finest level. And the way the levels work, they're kind of an increasing importance. Errors you almost always want to see. Warnings you mostly want to see. Info and debug you maybe want to see. Fine, finer, finest just gives you more control, having many different levels. Like I said earlier, for me, 3 levels is plenty: error, warning, and debug. So let's say we want to just look at warning level. This is going to show us warning and anything higher, so warnings and errors. We execute our trigger. Now we can see we're looking at our errors and our warnings. All right, the last thing I want to look at is how to filter based on users. From setup, we can actually look at logs. You go to home and you type in debug. One of the options is debug logs. And what we can see is here we've got the trace flags. This is basically active logging that's happening in the system. And then debug logs are the logs that have been generated. Now notice we don't actually see any. When we're in Dev Console, we've got 4, but here we have none. The reason for that is because we're logging at the developer log as a log type. That's something that's automatically set up by Dev Console. When we start it up, it's going to turn on logging for you, whoever's logged in, and it'll process logging. Because it assumes if you're editing Apex that you're going to want to do some troubleshooting, and you're probably going to want your logs turned on. But if we needed to, let's say we have a user who's using the system and they're having a particular error that we can't reproduce as administrators, we can log against that user specifically. So to do that, we start a new user trace log, trace flags, and we can do different types. Today we're only going to look at the users. In this instance, we only have 2 users, myself and the system user. So let's say we wanted to trace the system user. And by default, it's going to turn on logging for half an hour, and then it's going to shut it off after that. You can extend this by just adjusting the time. And you set the logging level, which is the Dev Console level. You can create your own. You can take this and clone it and modify, all sorts of different options available to you. But almost always I'm using this Dev Console level because it usually provides exactly what I'm looking for. So now we can see we're doing user level tracing for the system user. And how do we actually see that happen is we can log in as this user. And if this user edits an opportunity, and then we're going to log out. And when we look at our debug logs, we can see now we've got a log generated from the system user. Now we can also look at the logs from here. If we click View, you're going to see the whole log in text form. It's very similar to what we did in Dev Console. But it's just all in raw text, and sometimes that's useful. You might pull this into a different tool for some different purposes. I prefer Dev Console because of the filtering capabilities. So let's go back to Developer Console. Notice we don't see any logs here, and the reason for that is because Dev Console is only going to show us our own logs. But if we uncheck this box that says Show My Current Logs Only, it'll show past logs plus logs of other users. So now I can see my system user log, and as we can see, it's the same as what we saw in the text version, but this has nice capabilities because we can filter based on, in this case, debug only. You can filter on text. It'll just show us our warning message. You can filter on SOQL. You can see, SOQL information, queries that have been run, all sorts of niceties here in the Dev Console. So, all right, so that's been a brief introduction to logging. I hope this is helpful. I hope you're able to troubleshoot your Apex logic using things like this. And if you have any questions or suggestions on other topics to cover, please enter them in the comments below. If you're new to Apex, or even if you've been doing it for a while, please check out my free mini course. You can see the link in the description below. It's called Apex Patterns and Anti-Patterns. It covers topics of things that you want to do when you're programming in Apex and a couple of items that you want to avoid. So please check that out, and I will see you next time.